Good morning and welcome to this event, the second of three this week, which replaces the fifth PLA annual conference, which is normally held in the Museum of Docklands. I'm Tanya Ferry, I'm the Head of Environment for the Port of London Authority, and I'll be chairing the sessions today. Points of administration: you're listening only and you're all on mute, but if you would like to ask any of our panelists questions, please make sure they're in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We'll have a panel represented from all of the presentators, as well as James Trimmer, Director of Planning and Environment from the PLA. Just like the previous of our conferences, we're hearing about fantastic work each day that has been carrying on despite the challenges of 2020. Last year, when we had the conference in the Museum of Docklands, we focused on what net zero might look like in the river. And these sessions have been split in order to illustrate some of those challenges. Yesterday, we had sustainability. Today, innovation and change, and tomorrow we'll be talking about habitats to reflect the challenges in climate change and ecological that we face on the Thames, in the region and the UK. Today, as I say, we're focusing on innovation and change. We're exploring actions and mechanisms to deliberately shift the Thames into a low carbon and lesser environmental impact economy. The PLA has embraced innovation in a number of ways over the last few decades, particularly to tackle environmental issues. Previous decades, we have changed our designs and created a floating litter collector that collects its debris from the surface of the Thames. It's the first of its kind, and there are now designs from the PLAs around the world in other ports. In the Thames, we have it from Putney to Greenwich, and they collect up to 200 tonnes of now plastic-dominated debris every year. This year, we're looking to expand to a new design to collect more effectively and rougher in the rougher areas of the tidal Thames. Vessel design has also been a changing innovation for the PLA, with low wash vessels and the recent purchase of a hybrid pilot cutter, again another first for the river and for the Thames and for the UK, to replace up to 10% of the PLA's own carbon footprint. We're even exploring the use of amphibious drones to help the PLA improve its environmental impact while protecting it. We use our knowledge to innovate and provide opportunities on the river. In 2018, we were again the first UK port to develop and publish an emission reduction strategy, a green tariff for shipping, and an emission inventory for baseline. Research is now being developed to further the understanding of what innovation might be required to continue that strategy. In 2019, we published a decarbonisation roadmap for inland craft to understand where technology like fuel cells and batteries might be adopted and when. And now we are mapping that across the river to understand what the maritime alternative fuel demands will be. We've also innovated solutions to help demonstrate environmental best practice. The Thames Green Scheme was launched late last year and has been created by the PLA as a way for vessel operators to measure and demonstrate their environmental performance in an economy where customers are more aware of their environmental impacts of the goods and services. And we will be able to continue that innovation with other changes like the new Thames Freeport. The PLA itself, it has set itself a goal for net zero by 2040, if not before. We're already cutting our emissions by half by 2025, and we will be doing that initially by switching to a biofuel. We've refit our offices very recently and added to our renewable generation with solar tiles at our Gravesend site. And in the future years, over the next 4 or 5 years, we hope to triple the amount of generation we have on the operation. We've even extended our innovation to renewable generation and in tidal energy. We have this month announced a tidal demonstrator site in London, where we are inviting promoters to come and use the site to test the equipment and make sure it is deployable on the Thames in a safe and sustainable manner. We know technology can limit positive action, so we've expanded our existing investment plan to include a sustainable innovation fund. That innovation fund will run over a number of years and provide funding to the types of technologies we know need to be delivering solutions for the river itself, and hopefully the UK as a whole. The first solution we want to see come to the river is a zero emission flexible berth solution that helps with large ships and reducing their emissions when in port. Any technology providers and innovators that are listening today or see this video later are invited to go to the Knowledge Transfer Network's Innovation Exchange pages, where they are administering this call for us. The applications do close fairly shortly, and we look forward to hearing all of the exciting opportunities that may come forward. You can find more information on all of these things that I've described and the environmental project work page on the PLA's website. There is no doubt that innovation and change can be challenging and difficult to adapt to. But we have today a number of speakers that represent organisations and businesses who are adapting and improving their performance by adopting innovation or finding ways to encourage others to do so. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first set of speakers. Hop Ming Chang from London Gateway, who's a supply chain manager, who has over 25 years in shipping and has been working in the sustainable supply chain, has been working to find sustainable supply chains. Eddie Carey is an operational director for Compagnie Fruitière UK Limited, who has a fascinating career in bananas. It sounds brilliant. Has now been focusing on efficiencies in operations, and they're here to tell us about some exciting new opportunities they've been running. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thanks, Tanya. Hopefully I've got mastered all this technology. Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Hello, everyone. Hopefully a gentle presentation to start day two. It's not going to be too horrific. As everyone knows, containers probably carry around 90% of the goods around the world. And within that, there's plenty of scope for innovation and change. At London Gateway, for those that don't know who we are, we're a sort of modern logistics facility based on the north bank of the River Thames, very close to Stamford-le-Hope. And as you can see on the left-hand side, we're sort of a modern 460-acre distribution logistics park right next to the port. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a chill facility, which Eddie will describe in more detail later. On the right is our port. As you can see, it's dredged to 17 meters, so we're capable of taking the world's largest vessels, 23,000 TEU, I believe the figure is now up to. And in the background, you can see the automated stacking cranes. These are very I guess, modern technology now. Nobody handles that or touches a container once it's been moved in there. And they basically allow us to load trucks and HGVs, allowing them to get in and out of the port in less than sort of an hour to an hour or even 40 minutes. Next slide, please, Theo. So in terms of what we're doing at London Gateway, I think that there are, as Tanya sort of highlighted, we have to move very much into this zero and low carbon arena as things move on. And I think there are many things that you can look at now that have become very economical. One of the things is the hybrid shuttles. The fleet of those are increasing at London Gateway, and as you can see, it does reduce the amount of fuel consumption by 30%. I guess the newest piece of technology, and we currently have one on trial, is the electric shuttles. They can be fully charged in 5 minutes, and you can see the picture on the bottom right, induction charging, and basically they have 55 minutes runtime. There's zero emission, and without carrying any fuel, there's no risk of fuel leaks. And really one of these sort of other benefits coming out of that is around the filter and lubricant waste and all the other maintenance costs, that they're just simpler to operate and maintain. One of the other things that come out of this is around the energy and how much is expended. There's a lot less energy used per move when compared to hybrid, but obviously the initial capital cost is a lot higher. But again, we're hopeful that as we run this and trial it, we can develop this and bring more shuttles onto the port. Right, at this stage, I'll hand over to Eddie, who'll give you something a little more interesting in terms of what they're doing at Compagnie Fruitier. Next slide, please, Theo.
Okay, morning everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to share this platform with the Port of London Authority and DP World. You'll see from the title of my slide, this is the world's first automated banana ripening facility. It wasn't actually until I sat down in a quiet place and put this slide together that I actually realised that what we'd done was create the world's first automated banana ripening facility. So yeah, it is definitely a world's first. 3 years ago, when we threw old plans away and locations away and decided to revisit this project, the main driver for the project was all about efficiency. It wasn't to become a world first, it was about being more efficient in everything we do. But yes, along the way, we've obviously created something that is a world's first. Electric pallet taxis. These are taxis. I know we talked about shuttles. We refer to our shuttles as taxis because they effectively can deliver something from A to anywhere as opposed to just A to B. So very, very modern technology, very different. Shuttles aren't unusual in warehouse facilities. Our shuttles are different because they go forwards, backwards, left, right, wherever, up, down. So quite innovative. Our system has a fully integrated ERP. So an ERP is basically enterprise resource planning and a warehouse management system. So we're linking right the way back to our growers at source to ensure that the information we get from source links directly into our ERP system. Our containers are expected. When fruit arrives in our building, it's expected, and our system automatically scans. The smart charging, when the shuttles, the taxis have something to do, they go off and do something. But when they don't have anything to do, they revert back to their docking stations and will charge up to 98% ready to start work again. So that a full charge is 4 hours. The runtime of a shuttle is 6 hours. We also have complete remote monitoring, reduced maintenance cost. In the past, a typically very, very heavy forklift truck would drive into ripening rooms, drive up and down, bump into curbs. Because of the automated shuttling system, we certainly will reduce maintenance costs. And we also have the opportunity to do out of hours loading and unloading. So effectively programming the rooms to start emptying an hour before somebody starts work, so that when somebody starts work, we're very efficient in terms of I have a buffer of stock and a buffer of work to do. So our target in this site is to be running at 95% efficiency. From an energy saving point of view, semi-automated ripening. Ripening has kind of been the same for years and years. Myself and Andrew at Cross Refrigeration taught at length about we weren't just going to do something that was the same that everybody else has done. We were going to do something that was very different. We wanted to reduce the amount of energy we used. We ultimately wanted to improve the customer shelf life. That ultimately would reduce food waste. So absolutely 100% focused on how we improve customer shelf life and reduce food waste. When we started the project, we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't actually know how we were going to do it. So between us, cross refrigeration, created an air distribution system that's been patented. Although I have pictures to the right that show a pallet shuttle, it shows a pallet of bananas, which are company fruitières bananas with the SCB brand. I'm showing a ripening room door. I'm not in a position to be able to start sharing videos and images of the internals of the room just yet, but at some point we possibly may be able to. Within the ripening rooms, we have ultra efficient EC ripening room fans. EC basically means electronically computated or electronically controlled effectively. So it gives us the opportunity to increase the load on the fans at times when we need them to be more efficient, but and use more energy. But when we don't need them to be as energy consuming, we can turn the fans down. We can reduce the amount of energy consumption, and we can also reverse the fans to go in different directions. We also have, all our system outside is air cooled and it's water chillers, so very environmentally friendly. Lastly, we've worked within a container, 11,000 containers on a ship coming from different countries with different ports to call at. We work very closely with the DP World operations team to ensure that in advance of the ship docking, we share which containers are ours, which containers we're going to take from the vessel, which we're going to take from the port, and in which order where we can. So we get some smart stacking that makes the port more efficient in terms of putting containers in blocks for us, and it makes our movements through the port in terms of picking something up and taking it away very efficient as well. Again, efficiency, the train service to Trafford Park. We have a site in Wigan. We run containers from the train service in London Gateway up to Trafford Park and then on into our facility, which is again reducing road miles, but also reducing cost. Okay, just to go through the pictures to the right. So yes, as I say, the shuttle on the bottom moves the pallets forwards, backwards, left, right. An image of the big condenser unit outside. And the main entrance into banana ripening rooms, and our nice company logo. And that's me finished.
Thank you very much, Eddie and Hop. It was really interesting how the management of charging and the equipment use has been really well balanced in terms of the use, and I look forward to hearing more of the trials. Eddie, I know you have to go, so I'd like to just thank you for your time today and sharing this exciting development while you're in the middle of testing as well. So thank you very much for your time today. If you do have any questions for Hop and Eddie, if they are directed at Eddie, we'll happily share those later so that Eddie can return to the testing. And as a general reminder, as the panelists are presenting to you, please do put questions in your Q&A boxes, and we will feed them to the panel at the end of the presentations. So now we move into London a little bit further, and I'd like to introduce Helen Murphy, who also has a career in supply chain and social responsibility. So it's a nice link there. Recently joined Corey's Riverside Energy as a sustainability manager. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Right. There we go. So thanks for your time today. So I work for Corey Riverside Energy. The company was founded in the mid-1800s and started operations as a coal distribution company working on the Thames. So we used to bring coal into the city and waste out. And since then, the company's evolved into one of the UK's leading recycling and waste management companies. So we operate 4 river-based transfer stations with wharf access that are located along the Thames from west to east London. So we have Wandsworth, Battersea, City of London and Tower Hamlets. And waste from households and businesses is received at the transfer stations and then put in containers and transported downriver to our energy from waste facility on one of our fleet of 5 tugs, which pull the containers on one of our more than 50 barges. Just try and move my slides. Gone too far. There you go. So we also receive and sort recyclates at our materials recycling facility, which is known as a MRF, which is co-located with our river-based transfer station in Wandsworth. And the MRF can separate recycling into 15 categories, including 5 different types of plastic. And it sorts up to 69,000 tonnes of material every year. And 99% of what can be recycled is sent for reprocessing into new products by third-party companies. And we also manage 2 household waste and recycling centres on behalf of the Western Riverside Waste Authority and the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, which are co-located with our transfer stations in Wandsworth and Tower Hamlets, providing local communities there with a safe way of disposing of their unwanted goods, many of which can be reused or recycled. So once waste is on the river, it gets taken to our Riverside Energy from Waste facility in Belvedere. This is one of the largest operational energy from waste plants in the UK, and the only one with both river and road infrastructure for receiving waste. So the primary purpose of energy from waste is obviously the sanitary management and treatment of waste that's left over after recycling, and that would result in higher human and environmental impacts if it was left unmanaged or placed in landfill. And through energy from waste, waste materials sanitized and eliminated to maintain a clean and healthy society. And the secondary function of energy from waste is recovery of energy embedded in the waste. So in the case of Riverside, it's used to generate baseload electricity, which is then sold on to the UK grid. And the process also produces byproducts, so incinerator, bottom ash and metals, which are transported again along the river to the port of Tilbury, where the metals are extracted for recycling, and up to 200,000 tonnes of IBA is recycled into aggregate for construction and roads, which reduces the need to quarry virgin materials. Sorry, I just missed Gravesend. So we also have a ship repair yard in Gravesend where we repair our barges and also third-party vessels that operate on the river. Here you can see pictures of our transfer stations and our tugs and barges in operation. They're a very common sight for most people who live or work on the Thames, but often they don't know they're transporting waste out of London. On the top left is our waste transfer station in Wandsworth, and bottom right is in Tower Hamlets. And there you can see our tugs pulling the containers of waste on the barges. So our river operations save around 100,000 truck movements a year through London. So obviously that means less road congestion, fewer accidents and less air pollution. Last year, 89% of the waste processed by our Riverside facility was transported by river, and together with the ash that goes to Tilbury, this means we're currently transporting over 1 million tonnes of material by river each year. So our tugs are still using diesel at the moment, but last year we did a trial of hydrotreated vegetable oil, so HVO. Many of you sure will know that this is an ultra low emission sustainable fuel made entirely from waste materials such as used cooking oils. We've got another trial coming up again soon in about 2 weeks, and we are hoping to move our river fleet onto HVO soon if the trials are successful. So carbon benefits of energy from waste. Today, many stakeholders, including our industry, are working to build a more circular UK economy by focusing on waste prevention and encouraging the development of products that are designed to be used for longer and to be repaired and reused. But there's always going to be some materials that can't be reused or recycled and have reached the end of their useful life in terms of the carbon cost of its reuse. So when material falls out of the cycle of reuse, energy from waste provides the lowest carbon solution for managing it. And its carbon benefit is based on the emissions it avoids and offsets. This includes methane from landfill, which is a greenhouse gas that's 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year lifespan, also displacing emissions from energy that would be generated by fossil fuel power stations, avoiding the need to quarry virgin materials for aggregate that can be produced from the byproducts of the energy from waste process, so the ash that I mentioned, as well as the metals. So, but energy from waste can go even further, and it must. So currently our process is also producing heat, which is being released into the atmosphere as waste heat. And the simplest way for us to drive greater carbon efficiency of our facility is to use this heat in a heat network, which means that we'd be capturing the waste heat and supplying it to local homes and businesses to use for home heating, which would remove the need for use of natural gas. So we have partnered with the energy company Vattenfall, and we're aiming to deliver affordable, reliable and low carbon heat to communities in Southeast London through the Riverside Heat Network project. So this aims to connect our facility in Riverside with properties in the London Borough of Bexley and Royal Borough of Greenwich. And our facility has the capability to provide heat that's equivalent to 10,000 home boilers. And for us and Vattenfall, this project really presents a watershed moment in London's decarbonisation journey by transforming how a large part of the city is supplied with heat. So our future plans, we were granted a development consent order in April 2020 by the Secretary of State for Business to develop the Riverside Energy Park. This is a new energy from waste facility that would be adjacent to our existing one. You can see the artist's impression on the slide of what they look like side by side. So there's still a lack of capacity for waste management in London and the Southeast UK, with millions of tons of waste currently being landfilled or exported abroad. So developing REP will help to address this waste treatment capacity gap whilst doubling the size of our business. And when the facility is commissioned in 2025, at least 75% of the waste it receives will be transported by river, which will mean about 1.75 million tonnes of waste moved by Corey up and down the Thames each year. So just a final word on our overall net zero strategy. We are in the final process of working with our industry association, ESA, the Environmental Services Association, which is developing a sector-wide net zero strategy for recycling, resource and waste management sector. It's going to put the whole sector on a sort of timeline, and we're going to commit to a date, but that's going to be coming out in the next month or so. But for Corey's part, we have 4 elements of our own net zero strategy. First, focusing on transparency and climate governance, so ensuring that everyone in our business understands climate-related risks and making sure the sort of executive team feed that into our business strategy. Looking at operational emissions, so applying laser focus to energy efficiency and reducing fuel consumption across all our sites. So this means, of course, exploring low carbon and electric vehicles alternative where on the river or at our sites, and of course, hopefully switching to HVO in the interim. We've also committed to low carbon construction techniques for our new build projects. So we'll be working with our contractors and partners to reduce embodied carbon in new builds by adopting new technologies and piloting new materials and specifying low carbon energy and diesel alternatives. Finally, on the combustion side, for us to reach net zero, we need plastics to be removed from residual waste, and there's a lot of exciting things coming up that the UK government and other stakeholders are focusing on to ensure that plastics are not put in waste, their use is reduced and they're recycled appropriately, and carbon capture and storage. So there's been a couple of really exciting announcements really recently from the energy from waste sector in the UK in terms of carbon capture, utilisation and storage projects. And we will be closely monitoring developments in these and engaging with our peers who have projects ongoing to understand how the technology and learnings could be applied across the sector and hopefully to our facilities within the next decade or so. So that's it from me.
Great, thank you very much, Helen, for that. Really interesting how that there's so many materials coming out of the process that actually can be used, and And then the irony is not lost on me that the material at the end of the process is then made onto roads, of which the entire chain of supply you've avoided it reaching in the first place. It's making the roads itself. So thank you very much for that. Again, if there's any questions for Helen, we'll pick them up at the Q&A. Please do pop them in the chat. I can see there's a couple there, so I suspect there'll be lots of questions around some of those interesting innovations around plastic, Helen. I've certainly got a few that I can think of asking you, but I won't take my prerogative just yet. Thank you, Helen. I'm now going to introduce Ashley Steer from the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. Sorry, I was going to use the acronym MCA, who's the Assistant Director of the Maritime Future Tech team. He joined the MCA in order to lead the newly formed team from a systems engineering background. So he's here to tell us about the team itself. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my screen, but if you can't, please let me know. So yeah, as you said, Tanya, I work for the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. For those who don't know who the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency are, we're an executive agency of the Department for Transport, part of wider UK government. We have two primary parts of the organisation. We've got Her Majesty's Coast Guard and also responsible for maritime safety in the UK. So let me, without further ado, onto the slide. So in terms of the maritime safety element of the agency, we're responsible for implementing under the primary legislation of the Merchant Shipping Act, and we're also responsible for developing and updating the secondary legislation that falls underneath that. So for those who are aware, that's where the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency has been in the past. We recognise, or we have recognised over recent years, that the rate of change of regulation is not going to keep pace with innovation in industry. It's the age-old challenge that all regulators are facing, and we recognise we want to do something about it. So we risk, if we don't do anything about it, becoming an enabler to the implementation of technologies, of novel technologies in their broader sense, so both autonomy and also emission reduction technologies, without necessarily understanding the risks and having adequate regulation around those technologies. But more likely, if we don't do anything, we're likely to become a blocker to progress and block the implementation of those technologies, which we don't want to be. We recognise that shipping's entering a time of rapid change. If we think over the last 100 years, shipping's been fairly steady state as an industry, and it's going to be quite quick change for an industry and regulator that aren't necessarily set up and geared to deal with it. So it's another reason why we're doing something about it. We recognise that there's currently a divergence in possible technical solutions. This is primarily around the emission reduction technologies and uncertainty in industry about which technologies they should be taking and adopting, and it's leading to lots of talk about technologies, but not a lot of actual action. No one wants to back the wrong horse, as it were. We also recognise that the UK is entering a new trading space outside of the EU, where we could take the opportunity to gain commercial advantage through innovation. And yeah, we recognise, in terms of the emission reduction agenda, we recognise that the time to act is now, and we haven't got a long time to act. So that's our purpose. In terms of a team, as I said, we've talked about the regulatory function of the MCA and where the MCA has traditionally been. What we've done is we've set up a new function, so a new team within the MCA, which is called Maritime Future Technologies. We're a non-regulatory team, so we are separate from the regulatory function, and we have three core functions of the team. So we recognise that innovation, as I've said, is going to outstrip the pace of the regulation being developed. So we need to facilitate projects on a case-by-case basis. And our role in that is very much facilitation. As I said, we're not the regulator. But how do we support industry and the regulator to be able to adopt these technologies on a case-by-case basis, acting as that interface really between innovation and industry and the regulatory policy function. We recognise then that as we're developing that learning on the case-by-case basis, then how do we collate that learning and knowledge base to support regulatory change? That's our second function, and that's kind of split. If you think of the first one, facilitating projects being very short-term, facilitating regulatory change is more about the medium and long term. So how do we support the update of the current regulatory framework in the medium term? And how do we think about what the future needs of the regulatory framework might be in the longer term, and how we might need to adapt? So those two functions sit primarily or sit across both of the emission reduction and autonomy technologies that we've talked about previously, which are our main focus areas. The third and final function of the team is this influencing global change piece. And this is where we really go over and beyond where we've been traditionally. And this is about how do we provide thought leadership and start to objectively look at the technologies from an unbiased and holistic perspective, and start to influence change in industry through a raft of means and measures that we can do that. So those are the three core functions of the team. In terms of what our goals are, what we're trying to achieve, we're looking to safely enable the implementation of emerging technologies through the regulatory framework, which I've talked about. We're looking to accelerate the transition to sustainable shipping. We're looking to be a centre of expertise for emerging technologies, and in doing that, attract industry to UK maritime. We want to position the UK as a world leader in maritime emerging technologies, and more for our team, we want to be a dynamic and fast-paced and agile team. Those are our goals. What I've done is just provided some examples of what we mean by that. So when we talk about facilitating projects on a case-by-case basis, I've picked a couple of examples. There's a number of projects that we're working with that are looking to implement emerging and novel technologies that the current regulatory framework doesn't allow for or doesn't account for. So an example here of Plymouth Boat Trips, the eVoyager project that we've been working with, looking at the risks and how we might manage that through the regulatory framework and how that might be scaled up. I've also used an example from the autonomy side, Armada, a project looking to operate under Ocean Infinity, and a number of vessels of varying sizes that also creates different challenges because the regulation changes between the projects. So some examples there of where we are actively today facilitating those projects on a case-by-case basis. And as I said, there's a number of those projects across the country. Here's the example here of the tipping point between that regulatory change tipping point. I've mentioned we need to develop the learning and the case-by-case projects. And then when we've developed that learning and when there's the need and there's the requirement to move from case-by-case into implementing regulatory change, we have a piece of work around when is the right time to make that change, and we are currently working on some regulatory updates where we've already developed learning and how we can implement that into regulation. We're also looking to formalise an internal process. So at the moment, as I've said, it's very much case by case for these projects. We're developing a more structured process around how we're going to be dealing with novel technology projects going forward. I've got the influencing change slide here, and we could talk about a lot of things, but I thought it was useful just to show the kind of the types of organisations that we're engaging with and working with. So we've, as a big part of our function is stakeholder engagement, and we've got a team looking at the complex stakeholder landscape in a number of areas and building relationships and key partnerships with those organisations to help develop our thinking, but also then how do we influence industry in the direction to drive, rather than that divergence of technical solution, but convergence on fewer solutions and actually starting to see action and real change. That's just a slide that gives you quite a visual representation of some of the organisations, and I hasten to add it is very much some of the organisations. We've got, I think there's 630 as it stands today, stakeholders on our database. So there's a large number of stakeholders in quite a complex stakeholder landscape. So that's a big focus of ours. I will draw it to a close there. Conscious that's been a very quick rattle through, but happy to take any questions or after this or outside of this as well.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I think there probably will be quite a few questions, but for me, it's really good to see the sort of the convergence of some of those suggestions. But as you've just illustrated, the amount of organisations and stakeholders, it's an emerging and growing area. So there's going to be a lot of work, and as we've worked together already, there's a lot to do, and we're happy to see it happening on the Thames as well. Brilliant. We'll take those questions. So reminder to the audience, the Q&A button, if you've got questions for Ashley specifically, please let us know. And we're going to move on to our final panelist from Department for Transport, Maddie Mckay, who is a policy advisor for the Maritime Environment team. And she is going to cover the Clean Maritime Demonstrator. Thank you, Maddie.
So my name's Maddie. As Tanya said, I'm a policy advisor in the Maritime Environment team at DFT. So we're the team that's been working over the last few years on the implementation of the Clean Maritime Plan. And then more recently, since the Prime Minister's announcement last year, we've been working on the development of this Clean Maritime demonstration competition, which I'll be talking to you about today. Just wanted to start off by saying a really big thank you to you all for coming today, and especially a big thank you to the Port of London Authority for allowing us to come here today to talk to you about the competition. So I'll start off with a bit of a brief presentation, just contextualising the competition in terms of the current challenge that we're facing in the maritime industry, which acts as a bit of background to kind of how we've gotten to the competition today. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Theo. Thanks. So just a bit of context, like I said, to the challenge that we're facing. In 2019, the UK became the first country in the world to commit to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And the graph on the screen is just showing the emissions trajectory to date, and then the trajectory that we need to follow to get to that net zero by 2050 target. So greenhouse gas emissions have fallen over the last 30 years, but what this is really showing is they need to be falling at a much more substantial rate over the next 30 years if we're going to meet that target. Next slide, please. Thanks. So it's a challenge, and certainly from a DFT perspective, it's a significant challenge because transport is the biggest emitter across the economy. So in 2018, transport was responsible for 28% of UK domestic emissions. Since 1990, other sectors have significantly reduced their greenhouse gas emissions. So total domestic emissions have dropped by 43%, but in comparison, transport emissions have only fallen by 3%. So falling behind. Domestic shipping itself is a significant source of those greenhouse gas emissions. So it accounts for more emissions than buses and rail combined at present. Just to give a bit more clarity as to what we mean when I'm talking about kind of domestic shipping, so we're referring to ships that have come from one UK port and are making a call at a different UK port, so any direct journey from one UK port to another. So overall, the kind of big picture here is that without intervention, emissions from domestic shipping are expected to grow further, and that net zero commitment applies, of course, to the entire economy, but also to domestic shipping. So we have this obligation now to reach net zero by 2050, and we're currently not on the right trajectory. So domestic shipping emissions are actually rising. We go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So this kind of net zero challenge in the shipping industry is really kind of we're talking about kind of a revolution in the propulsion systems that ships use. So the graph on the left shows the UK domestic shipping emissions both on a business as usual trajectory to 2050 and then on a trajectory to net zero by 2050. And that graph really kind of highlights the scale of the challenge that we're talking about today, and just emphasises that point again that without action now, those emissions will continue to grow. And then in 2051, we'll find ourselves in a situation where we would need to find really substantial emissions reductions. Then the chart on the right shows just one potential scenario for the future propulsion mix in shipping up to 2050. That research and modelling was kind of based on a range of assumptions that went into the modelling behind the Clean Maritime Plan, which is available online if that's of interest to anybody. So worth flagging that we kind of recognise that it might not be borne out like this in reality, but this particular example does show that we would maybe expect the bulk of fuel used in UK domestic shipping to be in this case. So in pink there we've got marine diesel oil, but we're looking for a transition to kind of ammonia there in the blue. Of course, again, just to flag that other assumptions might generate kind of different outcomes. The overall message here is that we really need to be shifting away from fossil fuels and towards alternative fuels. And in terms of how that actually is brought about in the UK, it's of course clear that a business as usual approach won't work, and that there is definitely a role for government intervention in this transition. So if we go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the national strategy to date for kind of government intervention has been the Clean Maritime Plan. So the plan was published in 2019, and like I said, it's available online. And it really kind of set the initial policy ambition for the nearer term. So there's a lot of kind of thinking about the 2020s and the 2030s. So the ambition for 2025 is that all new vessels operating in UK waters would be designed with zero emission propulsion capability. And then there's also some ambition for the 2030s set around kind of the development of the infrastructure and kind of low and zero emission fuel bunkering options being readily available across the UK, and for the UK to be kind of leading the way in this green maritime space. So they're definitely kind of big ambitions. So if we move to the next slide. Thanks. Like I said, big ambitions, and we do recognise that the Clean Maritime Plan is maybe not enough to get us to that net zero target. So we have been continuing since the publication of the plan to really build on that ambition. So notably, we've been working more recently on a really bold transport decarbonisation plan. So if you've not heard of the TDP yet, it's a cross-modal strategy for the entire department, looking at kind of modal transport decarbonisation. We're expecting to publish it this spring, and the maritime elements of the TDP really will take our ambition further in terms of looking at some more kind of mandatory measures and more refined policy measures that will hopefully help to take us towards net zero. Then another really important policy that I wanted to reflect on today is the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Of course, COVID has had a really significant impact on the economy, and more recently we've really been seeing this idea of kind of pushing to build back better and build back greener. And a really key part of this, and something that the Prime Minister is personally interested in, is the Shipbuilding Agenda. Of course, the UK has a really long and proud history of shipbuilding, and the Prime Minister wants to see us kind of bring that expertise and those kind of capabilities into the 21st century and really kind of take the opportunity to become a leader in the green shipbuilding space. If we move to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So that brings us really nicely on to the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition. So just as a bit of background to the competition, it was announced in November, and it's part of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So the kind of headline for the competition is that it will make up to £20 million of grant funding available to support the development and commercialisation of clean maritime technologies. It is a one-year programme, and we are looking at kind of supporting both feasibility studies and technological trials that will hopefully kind of set out some blueprints and a pathway for some investment-ready projects for future investment, both from the private sector, but potentially also from the public sector. Just to kind of flag, in case anybody is aware of previous competitions that the department has run, that we're really trying to learn some lessons from other technology demonstration competitions that the department has run in the past in different modes, such as the road and the aviation sectors. Those competitions really demonstrated that there is a role for government to support investment in sort of the development of novel technologies and to kind of support their uptake. So yeah, really exciting for us to kind of be building on their best practices and lessons learned. And then finally, just a quick note to kind of flag that the funding is going to be reserved to UK-based organisations, but that we will also be accepting and encouraging applications from all 4 nations. Next slide, please. Thanks. Just a really quick run through then of some of the kind of aims and objectives of the competition. So we're really hoping that this competition will allow us to promote the design and deployment of clean maritime technologies in the UK. And this is again just to really try and ensure that the UK can be at the leading edge of this green industrial revolution that's coming about in the shipping sector. Again, we really want this to be an opportunity to identify areas for potential future investment and to be able to identify as well kind of places and projects that might be able to benefit from that investment. And then finally, identifying which technologies might be best suited to different operational scenarios, which kind of, as Ashley drew on, obviously the regulatory challenges as well. So will hopefully allow us to support markets and policy development as well as those regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. thanks. I will just flag here that these are kind of our initial timescales. We don't expect them to change, but they may of course be subject to change. So we're currently preparing our plans to launch the competition, hopefully by the end of this month. And the competition will then run through until mid-June, July. And then we'll allow kind of any projects that are successful to receive funding to run from August and into 2022, but they will need to be kind of finished by the end of March 2022. And then just again to flag that we're really kind of hoping to showcase some of these projects both at COP26 but also at London International Shipping Week in November. So some really great opportunities there for kind of, yeah, demonstrating some work that some UK organisations are doing. And then next slide, please. I think it's the last one. Yeah, so that's all from me. I did just want to flag 2 quick things to any organisations that are considering bidding into the competition. So I'll put a couple of links into the chat after I've finished. The first is a survey link. So we've just kind of got a survey open at the minute and would really encourage any organisations that are kind of considering bidding into the competition to complete it. Just want to stress that your completion or non-completion of that survey won't impact the actual kind of formal bid that you put in. It's just really for us to kind of get a bit of a sense of the types of bids we could expect, so the kinds of technologies, projects, locations, that kind of thing. So yeah, if you're interested, would really appreciate that. And then the second link will be for a briefing event that's being run by KTN on the 29th of March, and that's a briefing event for any organisations that are considering, again, bidding in. Be a really great opportunity to kind of get a bit of an understanding about the application process, and also some kind of tips, tricks, and helpful information about sort of preparing a good bid. So yeah, I'll post those links in the chat. But yeah, thank you all again for coming, and thanks very much to the Port of London team for having us.
Thank you very much, Maddie. Very interesting and really exciting changes afoot. So that's really, really positive. I'm just going to give the panelists a minute to just turn their turn their videos on so you can all see them. And then we're going to prepare questions for each one. You'll see a new face from the panel. I've introduced James Trimmer, who's Director of Planning and Environment for the PLA. So he will be asking PLA or answering PLA questions, so I can ask him rather than myself, because that's sort of a one-way conversation. So have we got everybody? Is Helen still there?
Yeah, I am still here.
Great. There. We can see you. Perfect. Well, we're going to start with you, Helen, if we don't mind. So we've got a couple of questions. There's one about the amount of lorry movements in the river, lorry movements that the river saves, and what that carbon saving is. And there's also a sort of connected question around whether there's an option for the use of the return journey now in 2020 that was previously done by coal, whether there's something around light freight or other solutions that quarries might be able to facilitate increased carbon savings.
Yeah, that is something that we have looked into and had discussions around whether we could be bringing sort of, you know, Amazon packaging, Amazon goods into London. So it's definitely something that's potentially on the horizon as a sort of diversification opportunity. But in terms of other products, you have to think about what could be put in our waste containers. So that sort of limits the options. I don't know the exact carbon saving from the truck movements, but I can get it. You know, it would be say like a small number of kilograms per journey. Was that, sorry, both the questions?
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Sorry, I'm doing the scroll thing I did yesterday, and then I've clicked on the wrong button despite changing what we're doing here. So bear with me. This was a question for Hop. And it's actually a similar one, Hop, in terms of how the designing a terminal from scratch enables some of the decarbonisation versus the sort of having to retrofit and do that, and then whether there's some whether you can equivalent carriage on a newer terminal versus an older terminal that needs that retrofitting.
Yeah, I think given coming onto a fresh site, even though it's a brownfield site, does allow you to set that out. And I think on one of those pictures you can see having all the berths along the same line sort of helps in terms of efficiency, moving boxes between sort of vessels and terminals, and even for ourselves onto the rail and onto the logistics park. So yeah, absolutely, having a sort of fresh sort of location allows that to happen compared to, I guess, our sister port Southampton, which is a little bit more constrained. I didn't catch the second part. Was there a second part to that question, Tanya?
It was really about the carbon emissions, whether there's a noticeable difference between the two types of ports in terms of new, because you're able to adopt sooner, I suppose, in terms of technology adoption as well. Yeah, so you look at along our sort of key front, it's all electrical sort of driven machinery. So I think that's the key element really you can plug into the grid or into a power station. So it means our emissions are a lot lower than a traditional port. I think the challenges, and I think in terms of the sort of clean maritime competition, all the others does come to the vessels themselves. And I think that's one of the sort of challenges that still has to be overcome. Great, thank you very much, Hop. This one is for Ashley. And it's a more of a approach as to how do people get in touch with you directly, Ashley? Is it best by email with the project, or will you organise or act as an organisation or a convener in any projects?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll, as Maddie's done, dropped a few things in the chat. I will drop my email address into the chat, and I can then direct on with the team. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I've lost it again. I'm not doing very well today. So this one was for Jim. What plans does the PLA have to deal with emissions from vessels in London? This is specifically for cruise vessels, Jim. I'm afraid you're on mute.
It was always going to happen to somebody, and today it was me. This, from what I've seen of the chat, relates partly to the cruise moorings we have at Greenwich. And of course, on our website, people will see that we published last year the report from a year's worth of monitoring that we set up, so active monitors all around the cruise terminal, to actually look at what emissions actually occurred when the ships were at the berth and a control when they weren't. And part of the commitment that we made within that document was to look at a zero emission berth. And we have started work on that. We've been working both to look at the opportunities and constraints of shore power in a classic sense, also talking to the GLA and to operators of the vessels that come to those berths to look at what opportunities and technologies they're looking at. As of course, I think has been mentioned here before, what we don't want to do is to invest in poor technology that won't generally be adopted and therefore not waste money. And the result, of course, as Tanya mentioned earlier, is the Sustainable Innovation Fund, and more particularly the first call that's currently out there for zero emission berth. And for technology that we can actually implement that. So what we started was looking at for something by 2025. We followed through. We have money to invest in new technology and new ideas, and that call is out with I think from the KTN, the Knowledge Transfer Network, with a closing date of the 30th of April. And that's something that we will invest our money in to develop and to produce for the river.
Great, thank you very much. Maddie, there's one for you. What do you think the impact of COVID has been in I think this is around emission reduction rather than sort of policy changing and the effect on DFT's implementation. So what's the feeling in terms of that?
Yeah, thanks. Not something I think I can speak to kind of intensely. I've not personally been working a lot on the COVID side, but certainly from our kind of policy development and the research that we're doing, obviously this kind of year of almost standstill, although the maritime industry did kind of really continue to support the country in such a crucial way. Emissions kind of were reduced, and that's something that we're kind of having to consider and factor in when we're now kind of doing research and we're thinking about the baselines that we're using. So definitely something that kind of has impacted and we're continuing to consider moving forwards.
Great, thank you, Maddie. This is for Ashley. How is the support for regulatory change progressing, and where does the responsibility lie between the ship, the flag, the coastal state and classification authorities and the ports and environmental agencies? That was a rather long sentence, apologies.
I think there's two questions there, or a question and observation.
The question.
So first part about support for regulatory change. I think it's fair to say we're very much in the cases, certainly with the emerging technologies, of developing our understanding and dealing with projects on a case-by-case basis and learning from those projects. Obviously, to make any regulatory change, you have to understand the technologies and understand what change it is that you're trying to implement. So I think it's fair to say there have been small moves in the direction of making some regulatory change in areas where we do have understanding already, but what we are doing in the short term to be able to develop that learning and understanding is setting up a more robust process and more structured process around how we're dealing with the introduction of novel technologies on that case-by-case basis. In terms of where does the remit lie between the various stakeholders, I think what we've done there is listed off quite a long list of stakeholders, which represents how complex it is in terms of a regulatory landscape. So in terms of specifics, I don't think I can answer specifics. I think we're engaging with a number, if not all of the ones that have been mentioned in that list, in terms of engaging where that regulatory change should be looking on multiple fronts. So I'm not sure I can sort of go into a specific on that one, but it does highlight the complex landscape that we're working within. Hopefully that answers the question.
It's complicated. I think it's a statement, but not being left aside as a result. So that's the I think we can say that's an answer. But again, if you've got more follow-up questions, please do put them in the chat. I am being sent them as we go. There's a couple for Helen around waste itself. With bad press around exporting waste, how much of our waste is now exported in terms of the London waste? And there's also a question about how the general public can help you with the separation and reducing the amount of waste versus recycling.
In terms of London's waste, there's still a capacity gap that we're hoping to shore up with the development of REP, which means that we can manage more of London's waste as close to the source as possible, which means lowest carbon emissions in its sort of transport and movement, minimising the movement. That will help with the waste capacity gap. And in terms of public recycling, the UK government's got a lot of initiatives in this area around their resources and waste strategy. So they're going to come up with consistent recycling collections across the UK. At the moment, there's a lot of confusion around what can and can't be recycled, and that creates a massive problem for materials recycling facilities. And also means a lot of recycled material does end up in the residual waste. The best way to improve that is to make sure that these materials don't end up in residual waste at all. So there's going to be a deposit return scheme set up probably, which means that, when you get a can or a bottle, you'll need to take that to a collection point and you'll be refunded for the extra amount you paid for its purchase. There's also going to be extended producer responsibility requirements brought in, which means plastic packaging producers get taxed for the full sort of life cycle of the plastic, including its sort of management at the end of its life, which is going to lead to a lot of improvements, hopefully, in the amount of packaging that we're seeing on goods. And there's also a lot of initiatives by companies and other stakeholder groups. So just this week, Tesco announced that they would be collecting a large amount of plastics across their stores. So things like pet food packets, and say if you buy a bag of spinach, that kind of crunchy plastic, that doesn't go in your home recycling collection, but you would be able to take that to a Tesco store and have it recycled. And engaging in those sort of initiatives will really help the waste management industry in terms of getting those fossil carbon plastics out of the waste.
Great, thank you. Very detailed answer. That's brilliant. No, that's perfect, because I think that's the kind of questions they have. The other question we've got for you, Helen, while you're still there, was whether there is scope to add catalytic reduction to your fuel rather than just switching the fuel.
Yeah, this is something we have talked about a lot, and we decided at the start of this year that we would focus more on the HVO side, and hopefully once we move to that, then see what we might need in terms of catalytic converters, because they would reduce the NOx, and we do have an issue with space in our engines, so then we would have to look at what sort of size we might need to reduce those further.
Thank you very much. Yes, space in some of the inland vessels is quite a challenge, and that's often why it's one thing at a time. We certainly found that with our vessels. Thank you. I've got a question from... Ooh. Let's try that again. Right, I've got a question from Maddie, which I'd like to bring Ashley in as well. Just there's a number of questions in the chat. I don't know if Maddie and Ashley, you've seen them, around the trajectory of ammonia versus hydrogen. I suspect that's probably because ammonia is the carrier for hydrogen, and whether that's relevant in terms of the types of ships we see on the Thames. The people who have asked are inland operators, so perhaps either of you, I don't know if you were able to answer whether you see H2 or hydrogen as a solution.
Shall I have a go first?
Yeah, go for it. And I'm happy to,
yeah, so in terms of the sort of functions that we've articulated for our team, in terms of facilitating projects on a case-by-case basis and supporting regulatory change, that's very much focused around the safety regulation, and that's technology agnostic. So what we want to do is, how do we support the implementation of any of the technologies being presented from a safety perspective and manage those risks accordingly. I think this is more about how do we understand which technologies are applicable to which areas of the industry, and where can they be applied. Now, the table, the graph that was presented in Maddie's slide was obviously based on research that was performed. We're building on that internally and building our understanding of where the technologies are, of which technologies are available, which technology routes from a holistic perspective. So considering all of the different technology routes available, and also considering them not just from a safety perspective, but also from a holistic perspective, considering aspects such as shoreside infrastructure requirements and beyond. So really understanding what it would take to implement these technologies. So that will allow us to be able to understand where there are current gaps in terms of barriers to adoption, and also where our gaps in knowledge lie. So that's kind of the work we're doing, and obviously we're supporting and working extremely closely with Maddie and the wider team at DFT in terms of how do we feed in that technical understanding, that technical knowledge from an evidence base. So it's really, how do we structure the evidence that's available out there in industry, which is there's a massive information available, often conflicting. How do we bring that together into a structured evidence base and cut through potentially some of the bias that might stand in that evidence, to actually start to drive informed opinion from a technical perspective. So I would say that we are considering all technology routes alongside each other, remaining technology agnostic, but really how do we structure the evidence base that is available to allow us to make informed opinions And that's some of the work that we're doing in support of Department for Transport's wider activity. Hopefully that helps and doesn't hinder, but Maddie, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Definitely agree there, but just wanted to clarify again. I think that chart is a little bit perhaps overwhelming, and all of that modelling from the Clean Maritime Plan, like I said, is available on the Clean Maritime website on gov.uk. And yeah, just to kind of highlight again, that's just kind of one scenario analysis, and conscious that some people might expect kind of hydrogen to play a larger role than that scenario suggests. But yeah, just if you are interested, check out the full modelling and all of the other scenarios as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm actually going to bring James in just to bring in some of the sort of modelling that we've done locally in terms of that mix and what we see it is on the Thames as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, we undertook, I think, Tanya, as you mentioned earlier, so a roadmap last year in terms of how we saw the types of fuel going forward, specifically for the various types of operators and vessels we've got in the inland fleet, which of course which move from ribs for fast passenger experience through to heavy tugs and tows as Corey have. And each of these have, of course, different characteristics in terms of speed, of energy, load, of efficiency. And we felt as in our role as perhaps as overall convener for the Thames that we should look at that. That work has been published and welcomed by operators, I think generally, who are now looking for the next generation of their fleet. And clearly in that, hydrogen does seem to be the principal fuel in whichever form, from cells or whatever. And now we're taking forward that work to begin to look at what does that actually mean for the river in terms of bunkering, the issues around hydrogen, where will supply demand, in order then, as the first element of the work did, to look to reduce the risks for the operator and to get into that cycle of people aren't using it because the supply is not there, the supply isn't there because the demand isn't, and actually then to provide some certainty for operators and for the hydrogen suppliers and industry itself. So we think it is the future, and of course ammonia for deep sea, which is perhaps outside, a different issue altogether, and how we move it and bunker it and supply it on the river.
Great, thank you. I think we're reiterating Ashley's point earlier. It's complicated. We recognise we don't know the answers to some of these questions, I guess, and that's why we're all working on and having events like this. Jim, while you're still there, there's been a couple of questions around the movement of goods for the river, on the river rather, being a potentially low emission method, but there's sort of encouragement of residential development rather than commercial, perhaps having an opposite impact. Perhaps you can talk about some of the planning policy and the work that you're doing in terms of shifting that.
Certainly. I think it's recognised in policy from government to local that modal shift from the road to the railway, or in our case, inland waterways, is a good thing. And that's accepted. I think we have an issue in that with planning, there are competing policy demands. And as I said yesterday, for those who were here, housing, of course, being principal. And there is always a demand and therefore an increase in value for housing next to water. And the Thames has a particular place in the hearts of people and correspondingly developers. And what we are trying to do by increasing this modal shift is to put effectively cargo handling, so an industrial use, within the heart of the city. And naturally, that can lead to some conflicts because we work on the tide and the tide moves. And at times that's at night or early in the morning where people have an issue with it. So what we do through policy, and these policies are in the London Plan, we need to encourage local authority planners to implement it fully, it is to protect cargo handling from nearby uses that might be impacted by it. This juxtaposition of industry and logistics with residential. It's something that we've been tackling, and Helen's colleagues in planning will know all about it. It's something that we've been having an issue with for many years, but I think it's something that we have had successes with, but we need to work on more, because clearly if we look at light freight, last mile delivery, this is something, particularly electric vans and electric vehicles to distribute it locally. It's something that we're going to need more of in the very heart of the city. And clearly, if the river's part of this future logistics chain within the city, which we want it to be, then we're going to need much more local last mile distribution next to the river. And then how we build that in with residential nearby or even surrounding and above is something that we're looking to work out now. And we need to engage with planners, with the GLA, with developers, as well as operators, in order to take forward. But if we miss this chance, then I think it will be to the great detriment of urban London and future generations. So it's something that we are particularly working on and need to develop as we move forward.
Great, thank you. There's been a comment in the chat, just to clarify, the vessel licensing powers for the PLA is on the basis of the same regulations as the MCA, so it's a linked conversation. So just before we divulge that to different discussion, I've got a question, and as those of you who came yesterday will know, this is what I do. You will all be asked this question in order of speaker order. So Hop, you'll be up first. It's from Mike White. What have organisations done in terms of business change to shift organisational culture, ways working behaviours and governance and process towards facilitating innovation and helping employees understand their role in the carbon reduction strategies? Hop.
Well, no questions on bananas, so we'll go straight for it then. I think it comes at all different levels. I think within the organisation, I think if you look at sort of our vision and sort of mission statement, it is around sort of this sustainability is at the heart of everything that we're trying to do. We are a big asset infrastructure sort of organisation running all these different terminals and facilities around the world. So I think for that, it has to, the environment has to be a key factor in that. It's supporting communities around that. So you look at all our sort of CSR policies. So I think that's, and then basically the proof of the pudding is in in the developments that DP World has put down. So you look at London Gateway as been one of their sort of new and modern facilities. I think we're very much here. We're very much in these discussions, and we want to try and sort of push that forward. I think it's good for us, it's good for the environment, and it's good for business. Ultimately, we have to do what's right. Our customers are pushing us into this sort of arena, but again, it's all driven internally as well.
Great answer, Hop. Thank you very much. Helen?
Sure. So same as Hop, we're being sort of have pressure from our investors as well as our customers to have a sort of coherent strategy around sustainability and carbon reduction. So we have a net zero strategy, we have a sustainability strategy that covers sort of wider remit of topics. We've set up a sustainability working group of sort of interested members of staff who get together bi-monthly to talk about delivery of our strategy. We've got a couple of initiatives, a sort of tax incentive EV electric vehicle leasing scheme, and we're also putting electric vehicle charging points across all our sites, and any of our staff who get electric vehicles through the leasing scheme will be able to charge their cars there free of charge for the first year. On the sort of high level side, I find things really helpful, like the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures recommendations, which should become mandatory in the next few years. But it means that we have to be thinking about climate change related risks, and we have to be reporting on it in our annual disclosures, and also the SCCR, the streamlined energy and carbon reporting requirements that have come in this year, which means we have to put our greenhouse gas emissions and our energy use into our director's report. And that is also extremely helpful from a sort of sustainability manager perspective of actually getting senior people in the company to understand our emissions and what it means, and then also how we can reduce them.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. Ashley?
Yeah, I think I'm going to touch more on the organisational structure change, because I think that's exactly why we've been created as a team. I think it's fair to say we've recognised that the way we've done things in the past might not be appropriate to being able to enable the implementation of these technologies. Hence, I'm here today talking to you. It's a really big step for the MCA to take, and a big change in the way we operate. I think it's fair to say we've been previously very much in our regulatory remit scope, and focused on the vessels and seafarers' perspectives. We're now moving beyond that space of just being the regulator or just being a regulator in maritime, and moving beyond that traditional remit. So we've got clear strategy of how we want to do things differently, how we want to move over and beyond there, rather than just being a regulator that says, well, we all know the challenges that regulation doesn't keep pace, so the book says you can't do it, so you can't do it. How do we look at different ways of enabling that implementation and understanding the risks and working with industry and other stakeholders to enable that to happen? I think it's fair to say in terms of how we structured ourselves, it's very different to how we'd have structured ourselves previously. We're very agile and dynamic. We recognise we're not going to bring all the skills in-house. So we've structured ourselves in a way to bring in consultancy support and work with academia and also the wider stakeholder group in a different way, and just showing how we can do things differently. So I think for me, it's really around that organisational structural change of taking the bull by the horns, recognising we need to do things differently and actually doing it. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you, Ashley. Maddie?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. I didn't want to piggyback too much on Ashley's answer, but yeah, we've had a lot of kind of internal changes within our own team more recently as well, to kind of make sure we're all really well aligned, and can kind of tackle those key work streams that we've got coming up. Some really interesting initiatives. We've been working hard, like I said, on the transport decarbonisation plan, but once that's published, then the kind of hard work begins. So making sure we're kind of really ready to be able to deliver over these next few years. So yeah, some really exciting changes within our team, and of course, kind of the environment stuff is really at the core of all of our policy development. So yeah, making sure we're kind of well equipped to deal with those changes.
Great. Thank you very much, Maddie. And finally, James.
Thank you. Well, again, for those people who were here yesterday, will know the PLA has committed to be net zero by 2040, and that is an all-encompassing programme that covers, in addition to carbon, air quality, climate change, and biodiversity. So it covers a number of areas, and clearly capital projects are important in that. And we mentioned the transfer of the fleet to HVO yesterday. We're also looking at electrification in terms of new vehicles, at some future points, change in vessel types. But there is, I think, to come back to the question, a major cultural element within this, and the principles that we've established, paramount in those is that it's everyone's responsibility and that everyone can make an impact, and we need to start thinking in those ways, and so we've developed other policies to assist us in that, through training, through to carbon pricing for capital projects. So we are looking then at the cost of carbon and of other emissions, and adding that to capital projects. Changes in terms of how we look at procurement through sustainability elements as well. So for us, it is a cultural exercise and a behavioural exercise, as well as one purely in terms of capital spend.
Great, thank you very much all for very, very good, thought-inspiring answers. Now it just comes to me to close closing remarks. Firstly, thank you to all the panelists for their contribution today. Some really interesting presentations and some very inspiring changes. For me, I think it demonstrates the role the river plays in decarbonising supply chain, and the growth of the river has facilitated that from our bananas to our waste. So there's definitely a process across the service industry that we see at home, and how that the Thames has played a part. But also there's been really key points for me in terms of the short, medium and long term, addressing the environmental performance of both port activities and shipping, right down from our harbour launches right to those ships. And those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday, just a reminder that all of the recordings will be made available, and HMM were speaking on their sustainability yesterday. In terms of the ships that call at London Gateway, so a nice link there. If there are any questions that we haven't answered, apologies, we're running a bit tight on time. If we haven't answered them, please get in touch with the events team and we'll pass them on to the relevant speaker and try and get those answered. And I've forgotten what I was going to say. And tomorrow there is a focus session on habitats. So we are looking at the ways that we're improving habitats in future, and what we have already done with partners and others along the river. So please join us for that. There's an announcement by our Chief Exec, Robin Mortimer, as well, that some may be interested in. Thank you everyone once again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.